Welcome back to Leaders Recon. Today we're talking about the Reserve Component National Security course with Major Tangen, a graduate. Now, before we dive into your experiences at RCNSC, I think I got that right.
Yes.
Can you tell us a fun fact about yourself?
So, fun fact, if you go onto YouTube and search "Where in the World is Osama bin Laden" and you watch the trailer, you may or may not see me on there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I had an opportunity when I was in Afghanistan with the Task Force Phoenix mission with the 41st Brigade from Oregon National Guard, so woohoo, go Jungleers. I had an opportunity to do a media embed with Morgan Spurlock. So he did the film Super Size Me, and he also did the film Where in the World is Osama bin Laden. So I got to take him out to out in the field, and he fires off an RPG in that. And that RPG, here's the other interesting fun fact with that. That RPG was actually given to me by the Afghan National Army commander. Said, "Hey, you want to fire this? You know, we've really enjoyed having you here. Do you want to fire this?" And I was like, "Oh, yes. I was so excited. And here comes Morgan Spurlock's producer. He's like, "You know, this would be really, really awesome if Morgan could fire that." And I'm like,
Wait, so
mission.
you got to get into the...
He sent me a case of wine to my house.
Oh, really?
So when I came home from deployment, I had a case of wine, and I was like, you know what? I think it was worth it. So I didn't get to shoot off an RPG, and so that's still kind of on the bucket list. Would be kind of fun to do, but yeah.
So yeah, that's a whole, so you have a whole whirlwind of experience here, including graduating from RCNSC.
RCNSC, yeah. So that's just the most recent exciting thing that's happened in my world. So yeah, it's been fun.
So I don't really know a lot about the RCNSC. Is that the right acronym? There, man, there we go. So I don't really know a lot about the course yet. I kind of have some vague ideas. I know it's a 2-week program. Can you give us an overview, I guess, like what does it mean?
So the Reserve Component National Security course is a 2-week course put on by the National Defense University. And it is a wonderful and unique opportunity. It's by far one of the best courses and grandest opportunities I've had in well over 25 years in uniform. So I was really excited to get to start it because of the little brief write-up that y'all put out. But actually when it started, I was just stoked. It gets you out of your current comfortable level where, you know, we operate in that tactical and operational level. And it definitely makes you think up and out. So it's a 2-week course that's non-attribution. NDU brings in guest lecturers from all sorts of different government think tanks and different backgrounds. Some are from the Army War College. They're from all over, and they have certain levels of expertise. They're well published, lots of years of experience in their specific area. So during the course, we had a couple of lectures every day, 2 to 3 lectures every day, and then we had about day 3, we talked about what is the outcome, what are we going to do, what is our deliverable for this, if you will, what's our learning experience. So we got an inject, and so it was a scenario, and then it was, hey, based upon the information that you're getting from this class and the national security strategy, the national defense strategy, the current ones at the time, how would you recommend we go about approaching this problem? And one of the cautions that they gave us was, you know, don't look at the world as the nail. You're a hammer and the world's all nails. You know, make sure that you are not just using the military as your only approach, because you have the entire dime at your disposal. And what kind of avenues and how do we balance those things? So
before we dive into like that course piece of it, you want to give us a quick overview of like, so who can attend the course?
So I believe it was 04 and above, okay. And I think E7 or E8 and above. Don't hold me on the NCO side. I just know that I qualified and I was able to go. So
what was your class? What was the makeup of your class?
So it was reserve component personnel. So there was Army Air, there was Coast Guard there as well. So it's not just DoD. Army Air, we had some Marines. So Reserve and National Guard, and so the background was just an array of different people. So we had some of our in my cohort, we had a guy that worked for the State Department, another guy that worked for the FBI, and then a few AGRs, and just some other people who had very different backgrounds. Maybe a teacher here and there.
And they were
law
all
enforcement.
They were all in DoD in some form or fashion, or they were from those agencies.
They were a reserve component member.
Okay.
So whether they were Coast Guard Reserve or Coast Guard full-time Coast Guard, but affiliated with like an AGR equivalent. And then we had another guy from Sweden, so from the National Defense University equivalent in Sweden.
Oh, really?
So he was a member of our team, and I just happened to be lucky enough that he was on our in my little breakout session. So yeah, we had varying backgrounds, so we all had a little bit of time to get to know one another and find out what areas of expertise were there.
Yeah, so I guess that led me right into my next question, which is like, sounds like a whole variety of backgrounds coming into the course. For those in our audience who, may be interested in attending or, looking at attending in the future, who are the people that you would recommend should attend the course? Like, is there a specific MOS or skill set or functional area that is more applicable than others?
No, I don't think that at all.
Okay.
It is not narrowly focused. It is not. So if, for instance, I'm an AG officer, we don't really do a lot of strategy, or a lot of we don't do a lot of plans either. Really, if you're a true AG officer, you tend to live in regulations and personnel policy. So there is no specific background. It's just, do you want to get more out of your military career? Do you want to learn more? Do you want to be bigger? Do you want to have a better understanding of the people that make decisions and advise our senior leaders in government and senior leaders at all different levels? So how do we come up with these solutions? You hear about something on the news, and this kind of gives you a little peek under the curtain as far as what happens behind the scenes and what happens when there's an international level incident overseas. Do we have any equities in that? What are our interests in those areas? And then how do we come about devising what the United States response to that incident would
Well, and
be?
I guess that's why they call it a broadening assignment, right?
Absolutely. It was definitely broadening, and it was refreshing too, because being in for a day or two like I have been, you just kind of get tired of the same old thing, or you can get tired of the same old thing, tactics. And I just got finished up with AOC, and, your professional military education is really focused on Army doctrine, Army policies, Army procedures, tactics. This was how do we fit into the big scheme? And it was absolutely exciting and intriguing, and it definitely required you shut off that tactical mindset and flip on these other areas of thought that maybe you don't affiliate with your military duty.
So did you know that going into the course? Was that your expectation, or?
A little bit, because the write-up that you all have in the broadening opportunities, that little, packet that they got.
Guess can I do my little
Absolutely.
Shameless plug here for those in our audience who are listening in? We got a new website,
Yay!
nationalguard.mil/leader development, and we actually published, so we link with the new catalogs, and all the broadening opportunities are there, as well as eventually this podcast. So,
oh, fantastic. So so that was your little broadening opportunities catalog, I guess is what you called it.
Yeah.
So I saw that in there. I happened to be walking by, and Mr. Fritchie, who I used to work with in iBranch, said, "Hey, are you interested in this? You really need to think about this." So I was, heck yeah, sign me up. This looks awesome. Anytime you have an opportunity to get outside of your comfort zone is a grand thing to do. So timing was right, and I was able to go, and I was really, like I said, really thrilled to be able to be a part of it. But then when I actually got into the course, it was even more than I actually had expected. It was amazing.
Now,
the speakers that they bring in are just top shelf, like very big thought processes. And it's a non-attribution course, so you can't quote your instructors. You don't get any products to take with you. So you really get their unfiltered opinions, thoughts, and ideas, and you can interact and ask questions and really be able to pick the brains of some of these otherwise inaccessible people. So it was a great opportunity.
Yeah, it's almost like you're taken to a whole different scene than you would normally be in.
Absolutely. It's not like, it is absolutely that. You are in a whole different scene, if you will.
So I guess that takes us back to, you were giving us kind of the overview. You mentioned is it broken up into phases, or how does that work?
So it's 2 weeks. You do you do your lectures, and then like I said, in the midway, about Tuesday or Wednesday of the first week, you get this scenario. And our scenario was 2 aircraft collided. One was Russian, one was Swedish, military aircraft, both of them. What are you guys going to do about it? So we sit back and we read the entire scenario, and we understand what's going on in the region. What are the United States, what are our interests in the region? What are our allies' interests in the region? Peace and stability and Russian encroachment, and all sorts of different pieces fall into place there. So as the week progressed, we got more and more injects.
And you're doing this as a class?
So in the lectures, we all sat in the lecture classroom, and it was all done virtually. It was their first time doing this virtually, which is absolutely not the most ideal, but it was still really awesome. So if you can't go in person and it's still a virtual opportunity, it's definitely well worth it, because they did just a fantastic job. So then we would break out. So you're designated into groups 1 through 8, I think is what we had. So I was in, I don't know, group 5 or 6 or whatever. So we did our breakout sessions, and so it was all done on Teams. So we would log on, or no, I'm sorry, it was done on Blackboard. So we would log out of one Blackboard classroom, log in on another Blackboard classroom, and that's where we conducted our breakout sessions.
And how big, about is the small group that you were in?
I think there was 12.
12, okay, so it was pretty
small enough to be intimate, where you had enough time to get along and get to know each other, and interact with your counterparts, and really be able to leverage that, have an open dialogue. So dialogue was facilitated especially in the virtual environment. But even I think that's the same format that they have when they do it in person. It's about 12 people per breakout group. And so in our breakout group, what we would do is one person would do a brief back, a summary on the lecture. And then we would have a really good dialogue as far as, well, what do you think this means? And it was student-led rather than facilitator-led.
Okay.
So our facilitator kind of on the first one said, okay, here's kind of how this is going to go. And we had this really great open dialogue. So you have, again, people with all different backgrounds. The guys from the State Department and from the FBI were absolutely invaluable. And then our scenario was Sweden. So here we are so lucky as to have the NDU, an NDU equivalent Swedish instructor there. And he gave us a lot of perspective that we maybe wouldn't have thought of. And so we have, our egocentric and ethnocentric ideals when we look at a problem. And he was able to kind of challenge that and validate others. So it was a fantastic opportunity to have those dialogues. So every time we had a lecture, somebody would come back and do the brief back, and then we'd start that dialogue. And then we would talk about the injects, and we would get 3 a day.
And inject
into the scenario. So kind of like if you're doing a warfighter.
Okay.
You're like, okay, here's the scenario. Oh, here's an inject. Here's what else is happening. So they were articles, like
new
published
pieces
articles.
of information.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Some of them different forms. So some of them were news articles. Some of them were,
And this is all crafting
policies.
Your response that you're
Absolutely.
creating. And in this response, are you briefing that as like a national security action to take, as
Yes.
if you're part of the NSC, or?
Yes, exactly. Okay. So you've done a lot of research on that.
Well, so we had another podcast where we had a member of a staffer from the National Security Council come on and talk about his experiences. So I guess.
Yeah, and it was
all together.
Very much like that. So we talked about the scenario and what our response was going to be, and we had two instances where we would brief, and we would develop a brief. We designated our briefers for our team, and then they went into a different classroom and briefed other students.
Okay.
And their briefers, so we just kind of switched
around.
And then we would give them feedback on their approach. And, well, have you thought about this? And what about this? And ask them questions and kind of prepare. So we came up with a couple of, it wasn't really course of action development, but it was like that. Definitely not at the detail level that we're used to in a tactical situation or even an operational situation. This was definitely at that, hey, here's an idea, and we could go this way, and we could probably leverage this. They never did want us to get into all of the down in the weeds and, hey, how are you going to carry out these sanctions? You said you want to do sanctions. How are you going to carry out these sanctions? How are you going to use a military show of force? How are you going to leverage that? It was, hey, we have these things at our disposal. We recommend that we explore using these and
big broad stroke pictures.
Absolutely. And like I said, it was really interesting to be able to go, oh, wow, we didn't have to go through the entire MDMP process and go, oh, gosh, scratching our head and taking hours and hours and hours. It's really big picture, broad strokes. And it's definitely outside of our comfort zone because we're drilled on that in all of our PME is, MDMP and how do you develop an order and how do you develop a course of action? And this is very different.
Well, and that kind of brought me up to, what I was hoping to lead into with my next couple questions, which was focused around DIME. We on the podcast here, our audience, if they've been listening in last few times, have probably heard because we've talked about it with the State Department, we've talked about it National Security Council, and you mentioned it here now too again. How did your experience at the Reserve Component National Security course change your perspective when it comes to looking at DIME?
Well, it just reminded me of the fact that M is one piece of the big picture. And military intervention, there's ways that we can project soft power and hard power, and it doesn't always have to be conflict. And understanding where you fit in the overall picture I think it's important, and it's humbling because a lot of times we as military leaders we are very military focused. Well, by golly, we can do this, and it's not necessarily the best option. And sometimes it's an option of last resort. But there are also other things specifically guard related that we can leverage, like our state partnership program. And that is a very useful program in the DIME catalog, if you will, of things that we can do and influence peace and foster positive relationships across the globe. And hey, make sure that that was ours. There was a couple of guardsmen and we were like, okay, make sure we talk about state partnership program. That's a good thing that we do. And it's not just going to war. It's not offensive or operations, decisive operations. So that part of it was very, it was good to know that, hey, and a lot of the other people in the program knew about the state partnership. And one of our lecturers actually brought up state partnership and I was like, awesome.
So how did that apply? So in your scenario, you mentioned earlier, you talked about Swedish, Russian aircraft, mill-to-mill collision there. How did that play out? What was your recommendation? Can you talk about that?
So it was, everything was unclassified. So the whole thing obviously was conducted in an unclassified setting. So, and it's a notional scenario, but we talked about using SPP to help in other areas because Russian encroachment and wanting to control and show their force in different areas and it's not just Sweden that's affected, but it's all the neighboring countries. And how do we leverage our state partnership in those areas of the region and reinforce that, hey, the United States is here and we're here to help you. So we're going to make sure that you are not, that there's not too much pressure put upon you that
you being the countries?
Like the other countries, so, we're here to help you out and to help train you and to be there as a presence. And believe it or not, the United States military presence is a very strong, it's a strong signal. And just having our presence in the region, it reinforces the United States' commitment to our allies. It's a very strong, like I said, soft power tool. So it was nice that they mentioned it. So, and we use that in ours, not specifically with Sweden, but in some of the smaller surrounding areas.
Well, and that's another thing you mentioned, kind of piggybacking off of that was, you mentioned the national security strategy and the national defense strategy tying into how you're making decisions for the small group. I know that we've got this new, kind of interim guidance for national security strategy. How familiar did you become with those documents while you were in the course, or was that, kind of expected before you came to the course? Or
Well, if you've read those documents, you know that it's all very, very high level stuff. And you're like, huh? You go back and read it again and read it again and read it again. And it was required reading beforehand. We also had a paper that we had to turn in based upon a scenario, and you had to write, kind of what your idea was. So they wanted to make sure you were able to articulate and have, some complex thought, and that you were really mentally prepared going into the course. But so the national defense strategy, national security strategy, and then one of our lecturers actually sat on the team that wrote the last national security strategy.
Oh, really? Okay.
So, he was on President Trump's staff or team, if you will, that composed that document. And he walked us through how does that come into play, and how is it written, and how long does that process take? And it takes a while. And to make sure that we, if we're going to go into a bold new direction, how do we shape things and not like divorce ourselves completely from something, just for continuity and stuff. And it was, like I said, it was a very intimate look.
Because I'm sure everyone else in the world kind of wants us to have some sort of consistency too, right?
You would think, yes. Or maybe they don't. Maybe China and Russia don't. Who knows? But I definitely, our allies want to make sure that, we're going to continue to be a global partner and continue doing the things that we do good across the globe.
So you mentioned a ton of things here that you kind of learned throughout the course of it. What was that one thing that really struck you as a surprise, or you didn't expect it to learn going into it?
So it was really interesting. We talked about Russia, we talked about China, we talked about India, and the people that came in and lectured us, gave us lectures on those, were thinkers in those areas, well-published writers. But one area that I thought, how come I hadn't even thought about this, is the Arctic, and how contested the Arctic is now, and how much more it's going to become contested, simply because of climate change and the melting of the polar ice caps and the waterways and stuff broadening, and what is out there, what are those resources that can be harvested from those areas, and what are the environmental impacts, and who's going to own that, and who says it's theirs. Like Russia claims most of the Arctic, if not all of the Arctic. And
you're talking about both poles, or
no,
just
the North Pole. Yeah. So not Antarctica, the Arctic. Yep. Okay. So it was really interesting. I hadn't really ever thought of the Arctic ever, and it is going to be one of those areas, potentially contested areas in the globe, and it's not something that we give a whole lot of thought to.
That's so interesting. Yeah. I mean, obviously, I never thought about it at all.
Yeah. I'm glad I'm not the only one then, because I was like, wow, I just, it had never crossed my mind. And when I saw it on the schedule, I was like, what are we going to talk about? And then when they started peeling back the onion as far as what all is there and why is it important, it definitely made me think outside of my own self and outside of all of my experiences, and going, wow. So now anytime I see the Arctic come up in the news, I'm like, oh, I want to read this. I want to see what's going on there. So it definitely sparks an interest in a different area.
So I guess, looking at people who are interested in attending the course, I mean, you've given us a lot of information for the audience here on, what they can expect, kind of the flow of the course, what kind of things you talked about in your experience. Maybe I'm not quite at the O4 level or that E8 level that's required to get into the course, though, but I want to prep myself so that, I can get into, this unique broadening opportunity. What are some of your recommendations for that?
Well, read what you can, because there's all sorts of books out there, and not just the strategy documents, but get yourself some historical context. Read about the conflicts that we've gone through as a globe, World War I, World War II, and understanding how those global things that happen, like now something's going on over here and something's going on over here, and now they're all connected. How does that interconnection really work? So my husband is a big historical nerd. Like it reads all these things. I'm like, how do you remember that? So he's like my go-to and Google, and he's really taught me a lot and really sparked my interest in history and historical context and how, one conflict leads to another and how did we get involved in this conflict. And if you have an understanding of how we get into conflict and what are those dime decisions that were made, prior to armed conflict, what happened?
That competition phase that you're talking about a little bit?
Yeah, contest and competition. And where are we? That was another thing we learned, where we are in that spectrum. And that was really interesting. And to have some historical context and not just be living in the current world. You've got to know where we came from and know what else is out there and have you're better able to frame things. So read books, not just on leadership, but read books that talk about how leaders come to those decisions. Like, for instance, right now I'm reading The Accidental President. It's a book about how Harry Truman's first 4 months in office as the president. And Harry Truman was a guardsman. I don't know if you are aware of that. You should be. You're a Missouri guardsman.
Missouri.
So, President Truman was a commissioned officer in the Missouri Guard, and he wore the uniform in World War I. And so, how did that frame his decisions, and what was it like being in the first 4 months? So, anytime that you can read a book that gives you historical context, not just from a military standpoint, but from an executive, if you will. That's one of the many ways. But reading those books, you got to read, and I am probably the worst person for that. I've kind of finally is sinking in. All the senior leaders tell you, you got to read. And now I'm finally able to read. You get your master's degree done, you get all this education done. It's like, wow, I can open a book for pleasure. And Audible is one of those amazing things that you can take advantage of. So there's all sorts of those kind of books out there, and read a little of history and a little strategy and a little.
Do you have any? So you mentioned the accidental president.
The accidental president. Yes, the accidental president. Yes.
So you mentioned that. Is there any other specific recommendations you have for sources that maybe our audience could pick up?
Well, that just kind of from a, hey, this is a good book or a good Audible out there. Never Split the Difference is a great book. It's about negotiating, and it's really good in personal conflict resolution. So negotiating, like if even something as simple as buying a car, or negotiating with your children, if you will, which is always fun. I have a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, and it is a challenge. So, the guy that wrote that book did hostage negotiations. So
really?
There's some similarities there. If you have children, you know what I mean.
Are they holding you hostage, ma'am, doing this?
Well, sometimes. So, anything like that, I definitely recommend that. You listen to podcasts. This is a great forum. Go out there and use the technologies that is at your disposal. Not everybody has time and or the desire to sit down and read, but there are all sorts of opportunities to gather information and to learn. Be careful of your sources, of course, but like another one that you and I had mentioned earlier was the Jocko Willink, the Jocko podcast. I get a lot of book ideas from books that Jocko does a review on, and then he'll bring on an author and then get some historical context and then talk about their personal life. And that is I've gotten a couple of book leads from there. So not just the Chief of Staff of the Army. Don't just look in, oh, hey, this is the Army. This is what the Army tells me to read. Talk to senior leaders. Find out if you have a mentor out there, look at the books on their desk.
Well, yeah, I mean, you mentioned this earlier kind of when we were talking before the podcast a little bit on, how most of the Guard is M-Day soldiers, and we all live and work in the civilian world in some capacity. I mean, both of us have, at some period, were straight up M-Day soldiers. And so I guess, for those in our audience who, they're not a full-time Guardsman, but, they have another career somewhere, how does the information you got from the Reserve Component National Security Course, impact those Guardsmen in their civilian workplace?
Well, it's a very cerebral course. It's a course that makes you think. And what it does is it turns another light switch on in another area of your thinking. And that is what makes guardsmen very desirable as employees, as potential employees. When I was in the civilian workforce, one of the best selling points, and this was in post 9/11, wow, you're military. There is an expectation of excellence out there. Not only ability for complex thought, concise decision making, you're on time, you're reliable, you're loyal, all of those things. And this is just one more thing that I can take, and I understand historical context. I understand now diplomatic context. I understand what's going on in the government. So if your civilian job, let's say I worked at a gold mine or for a gold mining company at Newmont Mining. Yeah. So, everybody has a civilian like, oh, wow.
Is that your fun fact?
My fun fact. That's one of the many that make Major Tangen unique. No. So I worked for Newmont Mining. And when you think about, okay, precious metals, we were very gold centric. So where do we find gold? You find it, there's gold in Africa, there's gold in South America, there's gold in Australia, there's gold in Canada. And then what are the diplomatic things going on in the government? And if you understand what those political, economical, the military situation, what is the infrastructure like, all of those plays, all those things, you better understand the operational world. So I did accounting for capital investments for Newmont Mining. But I also dealt a lot with the exploration people. So I wish I knew then what I know now from this course, because I would have understood a lot of the things that were going on from an environmental standpoint, of what is the political environment that you're operating in. So this is just another thing to not just expand your own mind, but to really be able to provide one more layer of service to your employer.
Just making you more valuable.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Getting outside of just the normal stuff that you do and turning on another area of your brain is absolutely invaluable.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much that's a lot of information, but I'm sure that, I learned a lot. So that's always a good thing.
Absolutely. I wanted to say one more thing. Being in uniform as long as I have, I've been an M-Day person. I was 14 years M-Day before I came on AGR. And the old timers used to say, you know what, never turn down an opportunity to attend a course, ever. If the Army's going to send you something, say yes. And this was one of those, and I am so glad that I did. I've never turned down a course opportunity in the Army, and it has been absolutely fantastic. So whenever they're out there, say yes, or even just go out there and find out what other opportunities there are, because your catalog has so many broadening opportunities that appeal to different people at different times in their life, and look to see what are you eligible to attend and put yourself out there, because there are so many great things. And it's not just for what it does for you in the uniform, but what does it do for you in your life, in your civilian career? What else can you lend yourself to? And when you focus on that catalog is just an endless opportunity.
Well, yeah, and I guess for those in our audience who are wondering what she's referring to, the catalog, the institutional training branch here at National Guard Bureau put out a catalog, but we also host that catalog where the same place where you can find a podcast online. And so yeah, there's a ton of information there. I actually went through it the other day just for myself to kind of look at like, okay, they were asking for like, what do you want to do over the next, 10 years or whatever for your military career. And, there's some super unique opportunities there that I think are super transferable to the private sector, like you just mentioned here, but there's the fellowship program over there at like Harvard, and some of those like cool opportunities for guardsmen that I don't feel like a lot of people have that situational awareness for.
Yeah, and so Center for Army Leadership, as well as the National Guard, it's not even Center for Army Leadership anymore, but the division formerly known as, and what you all have done is really looked at what can we do for our National Guardsmen, for our M-Day force. And this is really, a lot of the stuff, most of the stuff is designed for the M-Day force to really help you in your military career as well as your civilian career. And they bring in a lot of just tremendous thinkers these people that they bring in, it's not a waste of time. You're not going to get death by PowerPoint. You're going to have access to brilliant, brilliant people that may challenge your thoughts, may challenge your current stances or your understanding of a certain area. And that's always a good thing. Anytime you have friction, you're going to have better understanding on the back end of it. So that was absolutely invaluable. I love that part of the course. So, but that whole catalog is full of those kind of opportunities. So definitely anybody should take advantage of it. Everybody should take advantage of it and use that career map and go, where do I want to go? And plug some of those in, because these aren't one and done. Like this national security, the reserve component, RCNSC, has been ongoing for several years. So yeah, it's definitely something you could plug in to your 5 or 10 year plan.
Yeah, pretty easily. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you again, ma'am. I feel like I've learned a ton. And I definitely at some point, in the distant future, want to attend this course.
Hopefully it's not too distant. But yeah, I definitely would recommend, if for you specifically, for commissioned officers, get ILE done. So if you have an opportunity to go to resident CGSC, that's one thing. But if you're like the rest of the force, that you do your ILE and then you do AOC. Time. So AOC, you could do this course while you're doing AOC because they dovetail in very nicely. Okay. But if you are a graduate of the RCNSC, there's also an opportunity, if you're a lieutenant colonel, to apply to be a facilitator. So,
really? Okay.
Yeah, so our instructor or our facilitator was a former RCNSC student graduate. So there's all sorts of these opportunities that you don't even know are out there until you go to a course.
Well, thank you so much, ma'am.
You bet. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
If you would like more information on any of the topics discussed today, please visit our social media pages in the links below. Tune in to Leaders Recon over the next few weeks as we bring in today's leaders and pioneers to discuss their experiences, share their wisdom, and help you grow as a leader. If you like this episode of Leaders Recon, please don't forget to subscribe below and leave us a 5-star review. You can find us wherever you listen to your favorite podcast.